Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm not going to show a slow stitching technique or product. Instead, I'm going to show the 5 tools that I use every day when I do my slow stitching. I dare say they're my favorite tools, but they're also the most mundane. They're not very sexy, they're not very exciting, but these are tools that are my go-tos. These are ones that I use all the time, and I actually take them for granted. The first tool in this set is my Beeswax coin. Now I use this to rub onto my thread before I do my slow stitching. With any hand stitching, it's very easy to get the threads tangled. This beeswax makes it a little more difficult to do that, and this is how I use it. So I like to use beeswax. Sometimes you can get it in just the bar. You can also get some other containers which aren't beeswax, called Thread Magic. It's a different blend, but this is just a simple one. It's a little disc of beeswax, and it's put into this plastic container. And this plastic container makes it very useful. I like to thread my needle, make my knot, and then I just drag my thread through that beeswax, and I give a little tension with my thumb. I'm holding the thread, and I pull it through until I get to the needle. And then my thread is waxed, and it's less likely to snarl and create knots. Now you can see, if I remove it from here, all the little ways that I've cut into this beeswax, threading my needle, making it nice and waxed. So I'll replace this as needed. I find this to be a very helpful tool, one that I use every time I do some hand sewing, and it's kind of an unsung hero. Now there are different products that are related to this, some called Thread Magic and others. I don't have experience with them, so I can't really speak to them. But I know that this beeswax, this old school method, works very well for me and makes my sewing enjoyable rather than frustrating. The second tool that I use frequently is just a pair of thread snips. They're just tiny little, almost like scissors, and I just snip thread with them. I don't cut fabric, I don't cut paper, I don't cut wire, God forbid. I just snip my thread. They're very easy to use if my hands are holding something else, or I'm trying to hold a thread or a needle with one hand. I can use those thread snips with either hand, and they're very easy, and this is how I use them. So thread snips are great because I can just take them when I'm knotting off my fabric or just cutting some thread, and they're very easy to use. I just take them and take a little bite out of the thread, and it separates the thread in a clean cut. Now, unlike small embroidery scissors or larger scissors, they're just lightweight and easy. They're not great for cutting fabric, but they are great for just trimming little threads. Unlike embroidery scissors, which have their place and I do like them as well, they require that constant motion. The thread snips use tension just to snip. And unlike larger scissors, they're easier to travel with. I can take these on an airplane without a problem, or just drop them in my bag. They're small enough to keep them together. Now the third tool that I use most frequently are these embroidery thread holders, and this is how I use them. Another tool that I use daily that doesn't get a lot of mention is my embroidery floss holders. Now I have a ton of them. Some are wood, some are cardboard, and some are plain, but I love them all. I think some of these are just adorable. I think the most favorite one that I have, though, is this little sheep, because when you wind it, it looks like a fluffy sheep in these gorgeous colors. They make them with llamas and dogs, other sheep. It's just very, very fun. So all I do is I just take any one of them and I feed my thread, my embroidery floss, onto it. And then I just wrap it. And depending on the shape of the holder, I can wrap it in different ways. Some of them are more comical than others, like this Dashadon. I just think it's very funny. And I like the way they look together. Now when I store them to use, I just have this long tray. Now I'll keep them in this tray with the floss around them. And then I just keep a stack of the empty floss holders beside it. And that way I can wind my thread right around a spool, and I always have one handy. So I find these embroidery thread holders wherever I can find them. They're either made of cardboard or wood. I find them online, but also in little stores as well, and I'm sure you can make up your own. The next tool that I use, I'm sure you'll recognize from my previous videos, is a Frixion pen made by Pilot. So one of my most useful tools isn't a sewing tool at all. It's a Pilot Frixion erasable pen. You can buy them in ballpoint, in marker, or in retractable pens. I buy them any way I find them. I happen to love the marker ones myself, but they all work in the same way. It's I can take the pen and write on my fabric so I can make templates or designs, and then the heat of the iron just erases them. But as you can see, I can make all these different designs, writing right on my fabric in different colors. But because these are only temporary for me, the color isn't so much important as long as it stands out on the fabric. And then I can just take a hot iron to whatever heat setting the fabric can tolerate, and I can get rid of the Frixion pen. I'm always stitching over them anyway. Sometimes I even forget to erase it with the iron unless it's really standing out. But as you can see, it produces a fantastic result. And these I find in the office supply section. So you've seen me use this tool in most of my videos. I like that they come in an assortment of colors, which I can use based on my mood because they all tend to do the same thing. Different colors show up better on different fabrics, so that's the benefit of having multiple colors. They don't really show up very well on dark fabrics, I admit, but for the most part, they're very beneficial for me to use. My last tool isn't really much of a tool at all in that you don't hold it in your hand. It's just a notebook. Now I have an art journal and a standard one subject notebook. I use these every single day. I do different things in them, but it's pretty much the same idea. I sketch my initial ideas down in my notebook, and then if there's something I need to work out or I want to document for future reference, I'll use my art journal. I'm really proud of the art journal. The notebook, well, I'm proud in a different way. Not so much. It's certainly not artistic. It's not going to win any awards, and nobody's going to ask to scroll through it. The art journal, some people like to look through it to see what you're doing, what you're creating, and what you've already created. So that's kind of fun as well. And the last tool that I use every day for my slow stitching would just be my notebooks. I have an art journal and just a little one subject notebook where I can take all my different notes. It's messy, it's sloppy. I'm probably the only one that could read it, but it has all these different ideas that I jot down at any time of the day or night. I even keep this by my bed with a pen. And so it's very handy because sometimes I wake up forgetting my brilliant ideas. So it's nice to have somewhere where I can keep it. And one subject really works for me. When I fill up one, I can either dispose of it or set it aside and start a new one. And it gives me a clean slate to work on. Now with my art journal, I take a little more time to develop my ideas. So I can just sketch out different ideas that I have and then color them in when I get a chance. But for my stitching, I have an idea and then I can jot it down and color it and then make it happen in real life. So this is why I find my art journal to be very useful for about half of my projects. I put everything down in that little single subject notebook, but if I have an idea or I'm trying to figure it out, sketching it out really helps me for my art journal. And then these will take longer to fill, sometimes a couple of years. So that's how I keep my notes for my slow stitching. I do use a computer too, but I'm always going back to those hard copies, those notebooks and art journals, even years later. Now, none of these products are sponsored in this video. These are just ones that I like to use. Some, like the Frixion, are a particular brand that I search for by Pilot, and others are just a generic one subject notebook or some beeswax. I'm really curious, what are your favorite go-to tools for slow stitching? They can be something like a favorite pair of scissors, or they could be something you don't necessarily think of when you think of slow stitching, but it definitely helps you in your process, making things less frustrating. Be sure to comment below. I'd love to read your comments. Thanks for joining me today.